Our second and final lecture on the opening unit of our study of world history on prehistory is going to go and transition from early hominids now into early humans. So we'll talk about Neanderthals, transition into modern human beings, and then be able to then go and talk about what early prehistoric humans were doing before we end this unit and then move on to the changes that happened with the Neolithic Revolution, particularly with the introduction of farming, as we start our next unit on Mesopotamia. Previous PowerPoint finished up talking about the hominids of Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and then briefly mentioning the Denisovans. The last non-human hominid that we want to mention are Neanderthals. Neanderthals date roughly from 200,000 to 30,000 years ago. Quizzes are going to ask you for any of these dates. However, we want to pay a little bit closer attention to these dates because it's going to make what happens a little bit later in a couple bullet points happen. So we just want to make sure we understand that 200,000 to 330,000 years ago is overlapping with modern human Homo sapiens. Just want to bring that to everyone's attention. Neanderthals were discovered in 1856 in the Neander Valley that's located near Dusseldorf in modern day Germany. And that's where the name Neanderthals comes from. Now, we want to think of Neanderthals, the best way to do it, as cousins to modern humans. And we're going to make the case that these are very human-like hominids. They're pretty darn close. So close that if you are of European or Asian descent, you share between 1 to 4% of your DNA with Neanderthals. So this is why we mentioned they overlapped with human beings in that a cute Neanderthal guy made Google eyes with a cute human girl, and 9 months later, out popped out the fun on a Saturday night that they had. And so we see an interbreeding and an intermixing of Neanderthals and humans of European and Asian descent. And so that's what we go to see here. Now, most of that DNA is junk DNA. It doesn't do a whole lot, but we'll see in a couple of slides that the more we study the interplay of genetics and better understand our own DNA as well as the DNA of Neanderthals, we begin to see the overlaps occur in some pretty significant areas. People who have type 1 diabetes have similar genetic codes in that area, the Neanderthals, and we know very much that hair color is one of the things that the Neanderthal DNA codes for a little bit. People with blacker hair and darker browner hair are more towards that 1%. People with blonder, redder hair go more towards that 4%. And so that's what we begin to go and see. So that's how close Neanderthals are related to humans in that they're cousins. Okay, we've been able to interbreed and interproduce with them. Now, Neanderthals are different from previous hominids in that they have bigger brains, are stronger of a similar height. Of humans, they have bigger brains and are stronger at a similar height to humans. When we say bigger brains, we mean physically their brains are bigger. The average Neanderthal volume of their brain is 1.8 liters to a modern human's 1.4 liter brain. Their musculature is one where they are stronger. If we had Neanderthals be able to compete in the Olympics against humans, Neanderthals would win the gold medal every single time, even though they're at a similar height. So their build is slightly different than ours, which would give them an advantage in strength. Now, the Neanderthals are living during the ice age of the Earth, and so they're going to be living in conditions no modern human experiences outside of polar scientists and explorers. So their bodies have adaptations, and they're going to manipulate their environment in order to be able to live in these very cold, frigid, polar environments that they're living in at the time period. So we see that, and this is pretty famous for when you're looking at a Neanderthal, they're going to have much larger noses, much wider nose bridges, much wider nostrils. The idea of bringing that, again, if you're breathing in cold air, that cold air, particularly through your nose, is now getting into your lungs. Your lungs are right in the core of your body, and that's where you want to keep warm and heated as much as best as you can. So a larger nose is going to allow you to bring that cold Arctic air into your nostrils, but the blood vessels and other stuff is going to warm it ever so slightly. So it's going to be a little bit longer. You do 2 extra shakes, that's calories that you're shaving. Their stockier stature also help keep them warm. When we picture Neanderthal, think of someone big, barrel chest, shorter arms and legs. So a Neanderthal might not necessarily be the best rebounder in basketball because they're going to have shorter arms and legs versus, say, a modern human. Now, that stockier stature is also going to help them because, again, think about your physiology in the cold, right? If I've got my fingers and my fingertips and toe tips, those are farther away from the core organs. It's a long time for that blood to get out there that's 98.6 degrees, intermingle with the cold air temperatures around my fingers, then come all the way back in. That's bringing in colder blood that I have to spend energy to do that. If that blood doesn't have to travel as far down long, lanky arms into short, stockier arms, comes back a little bit warmer. You're saving again a calorie here and a calorie there, times being out in the frigid environment all the time. That's going to be able to help you. So this is how Neanderthals had adaptations to survive in the Ice Age, as well as how they're a little bit different from humans. However, we also want to make the case not only do we share our DNA with Neanderthals, we share a lot of behavior and other intelligence signs as well. Neanderthals, like humans, knew how to control fire. We've talked about this in the previous lecture. That could help them more cook their food, sharpen their tools. We know Neanderthals used tools, and we have a variety, and we're constantly archaeologists, historians, anthropologists finding more and more Neanderthal-made tools every single year, every single day out in the field. Cutting tools, weapons, fishing. We have pants sewed together with a needle and thread by Neanderthals. We've got fishing nets. So all a variety of different tools. So it's not just the stone axe. It's a wide variety of different stuff. We know that Neanderthals exchange resources with others. We have a Neanderthal grave site in one part of the world. 200 miles away, we have another Neanderthal grave site, and we see an interaction of resources between those two grave sites where the only possible way that could happen is with a trading network or an exchange happening between those two groups. We know Neanderthals buried their dead. We have a 65,000-year-old grave site of a teenage Neanderthal buried in the ground with branches and flowers placed over the top of her, like we would if you were burying a relative or a friend or a human being today. So Neanderthals are extraordinarily similar to human beings. Right? Like they share the same DNA, control fire tools, exchange resources, bury their dead. And again, the difference is that stronger of a similar height, physically larger brains, and again, have some adaptations to help them survive better in the ice age of the Earth. But does that actually help them go and survive out, particularly competing against humans? We are around today, Neanderthals aren't, so who is the more successful species? Who's quote unquote smarter is an idea we want to kind of express. Neanderthals very human, like in appearance and in their interactions, like we just saw. Males 5'5", 143 pounds. Females averaging about 5'1". So smaller than modern day humans in North America. But again, we start talking about freshmen in high school. These are very much weights and heights that we see in the classroom. Uh, and again, we see a lot of overlapping between the Neanderthals and the early humans. Again, when we say early humans, we're talking about our actual Homo sapiens, human beings here, to the point down to where it's in our genes for some of our humans today. And this is something we want to express and be able to compare and contrast, particularly not only on our quiz coming up, but also on our final exam in the end of the semester. So particularly in Europe, we see a lot of Neanderthal remains, and we're finding more and more all these days. We're not going to find any remains up here because remember what time of the Earth Neanderthals are living in during the Ice Age. So in the north here, we have these giant glaciers, and that's going to make it prohibitive to find, say, a Scottish Neanderthal or a Norwegian Neanderthal just because of the glaciers make it very, very hard to survive. Why do we have some there? Because of the glaciers retreating, going back from. But that's where again, and again, going down, we're finding Neanderthal remains into the modern day Middle East as well. And again, we want to harp on this and make sure we understand how do we compare to Neanderthals down to our DNA. And this is very much something that is not so much cutting edge research as it was, say, a decade ago when I started, but very much on the forefront of understanding where our species has come from. So not only have we found that modern humans contain Neanderthal DNA, we also contain Denisovanian DNA, and the more discoveries we make, the more that these prehistoric, and again, before the history writing, peoples become much more alive and much more human in actions and behaviors. That being said, we do want to emphasize that there are adaptations the Neanderthals had that make them different from humans. And again, we have this is in German, but comparing a human skull here on the left versus Neanderthal skull on the right. And you can see some of the changes when we talk about, again, having them physically bigger brains. We can see bigger jawbones as well as much larger nasal cavities here, and again, famously, kind of that furrowed brow, the deeper set eyes, is makes physical differences that we can see in the anatomy between a modern human and a Neanderthal. But again, like we said, very much human-like in their interactions. Whether they could speak is still and communicate is still very much hotly debated. There's videos you can find, usually a recreation the BBC did to be able to go and try to figure out Neanderthal vocal cords. But again, if they're interacting and having children with humans, that lends some credence to what's going on between the two groups. And again, we could go and we could spend a whole bunch of time, but Neanderthals making jewelry here out of this fox tooth, going and drawing on cave walls, and again, very much being a part of the human story that we tell. What can we do with their Neanderthal DNA? Well, a couple of years ago, this is again, it was more newer when we put this on there than it is 4 or 5 years after, but we've actually made in a petri dish, those little blobs there are Neanderthal brain organoids, right? So kind of brain cells from the DNA of a Neanderthal that we can then go and recreate in a lab in a petri dish. And like we said, the Neanderthals, we want to take this with a grain of salt because everybody's genetics is going to be a little bit different for the most part, how those genes are expressed. But some of those genes that Neanderthals have that show up if you have Neanderthal DNA in you are also kind of correlated with depression, addiction to tobacco, hypercoagulation, malnutrition, ascenic keratosis, urinary tract disorders. Again, hair color is one of the big things. Type 1 diabetes might also interact there. So we don't want to say that this is hard and fast. This is what it is. If you have this Neanderthal DNA, then therefore you have these things. However, we do see a lot of overlap between that, and we think that this Neanderthal DNA might be one of the causes for these afflictions in modern humans. The last human that we want, the group of humans that we talk about is us, all right? The people listening on the other side of the computer screen, me talking to you. Homo sapiens is modern humans. The translation from this Latin into English is wise men. And like we said, physically, for all intents and purposes, we are walking around in a Homo erectus skeleton. However, Homo sapiens, modern humans, have a much bigger brain. We saw the Homo australopithecines being a small animal, small brains. Homo habilis a little bit larger. Homo erectus a little bit larger brain still. Now we get to Homo sapiens, much bigger brain. Again, does that necessarily make us smarter? Not necessarily in terms of just volume, but it's the connections that our brains can make that we don't have there. And scientists, psychologists, historians, archaeologists, anthropologists are all very much in agreement that something happened in our brains. There's some switch that was flipped. There's some connection that our brain makes that other brains that as yet that we know on the earth don't. And so our modern brain was acquired somewhere between 60 to 25,000 years ago. So you could have a Homo sapien down to the DNA physically, but they just might not have that connection, that switch that was flipped that we have. And again, you start getting into deep psychological reasons for it. You get into other things, what this actually means. But something happened, and that's what allows us to be us. That's what allows modern humans to be able to take over the globe, to be able to be the dominant species on the Earth, to land on the moon, to put stuff into space. And so what that is still hotly debated, but something did happen to make us smarter. And so we are able to have new tools. And again, we also are able to plan our hunts. What allowed us to plan our hunts? A sophisticated spoken language. Somewhere around 40,000 BC, again, something in our brain was flipped, something adapted, something was changed. But human beings were able to have a sophisticated spoken language right around 40,000 years ago, which allowed us to cooperate, which allowed us to pass down learning, which allowed us to plan our hunts, which gave us that advantage. And this is an advantage that Neanderthals, as far as we know, did not have, thus giving humans the advantage, the Neanderthals a disadvantage, allowing for modern humans to be around today. So these humans are going to be moving out of Africa, and they're going to be interacting with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other groups, and they're going to be creating their own culture. One of the cultures that Homo sapiens make is the Cro-Magnon culture, right around 40,000 years ago, mostly centered in southwest Europe. And we can talk, and again, we talk about the culture of French culture or Italian culture or Chinese culture. This is just a culture of humans. And what this is remarkable for is the cave paintings. Now, this is a little bit misleading. It's a little bit more dated in its interpretation of these early humans because we're finding cave paintings from earlier, from before this time period, and more discoveries around the globe. Again, we have Neanderthals making cave paintings. So this interpretation is a little bit older, but what their textbooks going with. Now, the earliest cave paintings are found at the Chauvet Cave in southern France around 30,000 BC. The dates here, we want to understand that there is debate about these dates. It's hard to be able to get a concise date to this. If I go and want to go into a cave, build a fire 50,000 years ago, and then leave, and then 30,000 years ago, another person comes in, find the charred remains, mushes that up to then be able to make a quote unquote black paint on the walls. How old is that painting? Because if we radiocarbon date that, it's going to come from the ash and soot from when I was originally there. And so that we want to see that there's a little bit of debate within there. So take the dates with a grain of salt. Just know that these are old. What we see in these cave paintings, and this is true for around the globe for dating these cave paintings from this time period, is we see lots and lots of animals. We talked about in the question of the day some of the reasons and theories behind the cave paintings, whether these are magical rites, a calendar, or there's supernatural elements to it for storytelling purposes, or they're simply, hey, there's a rabbit, I'm going to sit there and the old cliche, put my thumb out and then paint a rabbit. We see very few depictions of humans, and the depictions of humans they have aren't like a face and oh, that's Mr. Kramer, oh, that's Johnny, that's little Jane. Okay, it's very much a stick figurey, abstract figures of humans. Except for hands, we see lots and lots of depictions of hands, very anatomically correct because it's easy to do. I go and I stick my hand in paint, I put it on the wall, and I got a handprint there. And reverse, I can put my hand on the wall, suck up paint through a straw into my mouth, and then blow over the top of it. I lift my hand up. The paint is on the hand. The paint is around the hand. It's a leaving then exception that way. So that's what we see in terms of paintings of humans is mostly drawing of hands. Think about making like a turkey out of your hand in elementary school for as one of the activities there. It's pretty simple. We find sculptures and jewelry in these caves. And then again, 20,000 to 18,000 years ago, the modern humans are living towards the tail end of the ice age. And about 10,000 BC, the temperatures begin to go up, right? 7 degrees globally in 50 years to get rid of the ice age. And that moves into something we're really going to talk more in depthly in our next unit in Mesopotamia. So here's our modern humans 20,000 years ago to 200,000 years ago to the present, sorry. In North America, males are going to average 5'9", 172 pounds. So you got a great example of a average male American right there. Females are going to be 5'4", 137 pounds. And again, this is going to change a little bit as we move through different cultures for a variety of different reasons. We're not going to parse through there, but that's what modern humans are. And again, Homo sapiens, we've been to the Earth, we've been to the moon, and we've gone all over the place, and that's what we've been able to do. All humans that are on the globe today, all the shapes, sizes, and colors, are all modern humans. I mean, we are all the same, and that's kind of what pulled this from a National Geographic graphic. And so that's kind of what we're going getting out there. All modern humans then share pretty much the same, nearly exact genetic code there with us small little quibbles that make me, me, and you. And that's where, again, we've been working up from there. So from our very first humans to, again, this idea of Cro-Magnon culture and then pulsing out of the other places to where we get to where we are today. And one of the things that these early peoples are doing is cave paintings. And that's one of the things that we're able to go and have. So some of the cave paintings that are pretty famous, particularly in Europe, are the Altamira cave in Spain. And that's this one pictured with its famous bulls on the cave ceilings. You've got the Lascaux cave and the Chavot cave. Now, the paints and pigments are used a variety of different ways, whether they're ores or other stuff. Very rudimentary colors. We don't see a wide variety of colors on these because there's only so many things that you can do. Remember, you're going to bring all of these into the caves themselves. But we see lots of different examples. And again, like I said, this is, I mean, oof, almost going back 8, 9 years now when I pulled this graphic off, and we're still finding more and more and more stretching throughout Africa, Asia, Europe, down into when the first humans are arriving in North America and South America as well. So lots of these, but these are just ones that are pretty famous in Europe. Again, the Altamira Cave, Lascaux, and Chavot are all pretty famous examples of that. This is the Lascaux Cave. This was discovered initially by two teenage boys, right? They were walking up a hill, right, walking their dog Robot, and then all of a sudden, whoop, they fall through. They open their eyes when their lights adjust. They go and see that. They find the most important person they can think of to tell, their history teacher. He goes in there, and that goes and gives, again, pretty famous discovery of the Lascaux Cave. Uh, these are caves, so there's a little bit of spelunking involved, and we see cave paintings in these caves in a variety of different surfaces. We usually show this to go and say that, hey, this is lit with modern technology. This is my worst nightmare, being in a small space like this in the dark or in there. But again, this is what the early humans are going and doing. And again, we see a wide variety of different animals in drawings, and to be able to go and do this from different positions in there. When we're looking at these caves, we want to understand that we still don't know the exact purpose of these, and one person doing it in one cave is not necessarily the same thing that another person is doing in another cave. So some of the theories that might be involved for the reason and purpose of the might be this a simple idea of storytelling, where again, think of the put yourself in the shoes of these people where you're bringing, say, 5 and 6 year olds deep inside the cave, and then grandpa lights a fire along the cave wall, and then he goes and he tells you the story of fighting the mountain lions or the charging of the woolly rhinos and the light and interplay on the walls here. And remember, these aren't perfectly smooth walls. This cave, this is Lascaux, uh, or yeah, where these lions are actually on this wall pulling away from you. So if you're rounding the corner, boom, there's a lion's face right in there. And again, with the shifting of the light and moving there, some theories are this is maybe an early form of animation as your eyes begin to play tricks on you as that light flickers all along the wall there. And so that's what we go and kind of get at with what they're trying to get for one reason why we might have these. We've got deer. You've got, again, one of the few depictions of humans that's out of Indonesia. Lots of hands, as we said, horses, oh, cattle. We can keep going. Bulls, lions, horses, woolly mammoths. Lots of different actual paintings that we go and we see here. Some of the other evidence that we have in these caves is these lines and scribbles on the wall. Right? Maybe for artistic purposes, or again, like this hand here, I want to be able to do more painting at the back of the cave, so I don't want to light my fire at the front because then it's going to be less fire as I have to walk in and then walk out. So maybe I have my hand on the wall and I'm feeling my way through, and I'm going to be leaving and moving the minerals and other stuff and leaving these grooves in there, which is another example of human interaction in these caves. We also see figurines, jewelry, tools, and other stuff within there. And that's kind of the world of the prehistoric peoples. Very much disregard what, say, like a Flintstones might say, we millions of years separate dinosaurs from early humans. So again, very much makes for a good cartoon show, but not the actual reality that these early peoples are living in. They are living during what's called the Stone Age, and what we begin to very much see, or sorry, the Ice Age. I'm reading the next slide here. The Ice Age, where again we have these very cold temperatures, and then we begin to go and see the aberrations. We get the Little Ice Age, and then moves up from there. But that's what we're seeing here. Now, in terms of historians cataloging this time period, they go and they kind of chunkify this up into the Stone Age. And three important developments happened during the Stone Age. That's the invention of tools. This is what your book's saying. And again, there's tools before here, but we're going to think more advanced tools. Mastery over fire, again, to be able to go and do that. And then development of language. The Stone Age is going to last for a long time. The Paleolithic or the Old Stone Age is going from 2.5 million to 8,000 BC. Now, as we just showed you, this is occurring during the Ice Age. The glaciers are going to advance and retreat over 18 times during this time period, during the periods of global warming and global cooling. And the idea behind this is that this has an effect on our geography. Why is Illinois flat like a pancake the farther south you go? Because that's where the glaciers then went and flattened it out. As those glaciers then retreat and they melt, that's how you get the Great Lakes. That's how you get Kettle Moraine State Point and moraines in southern Wisconsin. As those glaciers go and stop, their ice melts, goes into Lake Michigan, and now you got all the debris and detritus that are there. The oldest known chopping tools date to this era, and again, that very much covers most of the hominids that we've already talked about. The new Stone Age, the more recent time of the Stone Age, is called the Neolithic Age. This is from 8,000 to 3,000 BC, and this is where we see humans polishing stone tools, making pottery, growing crops, raising animals, and that's very much towards the end of this kind of Stone Age is where we get into our next unit of study in Mesopotamia when we start farming. So again, you kind of go see the Swiss Army knives and the interactions that the humans are having in this time period. We go from again Homo habilis using the oldest stone chopping tools to again where we're moving and interacting with our environment to finally being able to domesticate plants, animals, and then all the technological advances that come in the wake of that. To finish up for this unit, when we talk about early advances in technology and art, early humans are nomadic hunter-gatherers. Nomads are highly mobile people who move from place to place looking for new food sources. We still see some nomadic peoples on the globe today, but obviously they're a very, very, very small minority compared to all the humans here in 2024. But again, this is the idea that you're in a place for a little bit, you consume the resources that are there, then those resources change due to the changing natures in the seasons or migration patterns, and then you move on and you keep going and moving and moving and moving. Hunter-gatherers, if we're breaking down that statement, are nomadic groups whose food supply depends on hunting animals and collecting plant foods. If we describe people who are farmers, then people who are not farmers, those would be hunter-gatherers. And this is how most humans on the earth are gathering most of the calories for most of, quote, human history. And really, farming and the domestication of plants and animals is a very recent development in all of totality of human history. These would be voyager foragers if they lived near the sea, kind of think of like Moana in the beginning of that movie. We still see some hunter-gatherers in the world today, a couple islands off of India and Sri Lanka in the Amazon, but this is becoming a way of life that's good. Is this better? Is this worse? It's very much up for debate, and people are still, anthropologists and scientists and historians are saying, is this better for humans? Is this not? But what we see is that humans have moved away from this idea. Hunter-gatherers very much have the disadvantage of not having less guaranteed calories coming from, say, a plants and animals, but is that better or is that worse? That it's still a dietitian, a physiological, a psychological debate that we as humans are still having today. What we see towards the end of the Neolithic age is a technological revolution where all of a sudden we see this explosion of hundreds of different tools, knives, fish hooks, harpoons, chisels, sewing needles, that begin to say, we begin to see this explosion of cave paintings, sculptures, and necklaces, and that becomes kind of this impetus, this driving force where we start to see other changes such as agriculture, such as writing, that then begins to allow us to have other historical events happen. And that's all happening towards the tail end of this Neolithic age, the New Stone Age, and we can talk about a Neolithic revolution very much in the introduction of our next unit of study. So what we see beads, shell beads there for a necklace or a bracelet. Think of like a puka shell necklace as we have there. This is a flute made out of a vulture, and to be able to go and make music. More ivory beads from tooth, and again we see things like this where in the Ukraine is where they pulled this out from 15,000 years ago. This structure made out of mammoth skulls. And again, picture these big giant tusks curling around there to form kind of the outer shell of this frame in the shelter. And as more and more people begin to kind of move into more these semi-permanent, if not permanent places, we begin to see changes in human developments there. We begin to move towards this more Neolithic person who begins to write, who begins to farm, and we'll see the far-reaching changes that those have on humanity as we move into our next unit.